Welcome to This Week in South Carolina. I'm Gavin Jackson. Tonight we talk with the new state elections director, Conway Belangia, as he prepares for the upcoming primaries in his new role. But first, we continue our conversations with the candidates. This week we're talking with Republican gubernatorial candidate Attorney General Alan Wilson. We caught up with Attorney General Alan Wilson at the Greek restaurant Grecian Gardens, a staple of the West Columbia community, and not far from Wilson's election headquarters and his downtown Columbia office. We spoke for nearly 30 minutes with an emphasis on his time in the South Carolina Army National Guard, his time serving in Operation Iraqi Freedom, and other aspects of his life before becoming State Attorney General in 2010, a position he's been reelected to 3 times.
So I grew up 10 minutes from here, over near West Columbia, it's Springdale town, town of Springdale, and grew up in a family with 3 brothers. My mother was married before, and she and her first husband had me. He was my biological father, and when I was about 2 years old, he was tragically killed in a training exercise at Fort Bragg. Mom returned back home here to the Columbia area with a toddler, and she was a public school teacher, and within a year or two, she reconnected with an old flame, Joe Wilson, and they got married when I was 4, and he adopted me. I grew up in a house, I remember very distinctly, as a young kid, my dad would come in every morning and say, or every night rather, he'd hear my prayers and he would say, there are little boys out there that don't have a dad in their life, and you're so blessed that you had 2 in your life that loved you with all their heart. He always reminded me of that blessing to have, 2 dads that loved me. And I just grew up in a very loving home. I mean, obviously my parents were not perfect, none of us are, but they sacrificed to give my brothers and me every opportunity. My 3 brothers and I all grew up. We all became Eagle Scouts. I give my mom the credit for that, staying on top of this, sewing those merit badges on. All 4 of us as adults, we all became commissioned officers in the military. All 4 of us have served overseas. I'm still serving now in my 30th, about to start my 30th year in the military service as a colonel. But I got that from my dad. My dad, Joe, my biological father was an Army guy. My adopted father, Joe, was a National Guard officer for 3 decades. Most of the men in my family have served in some capacity. So public service was always drilled into us. Of course, growing up, my dad was obviously very active in the community, civically speaking. He was obviously represented this community in the state Senate. So I got to grow up watching him. I went to Rotary meetings, Sertoma meetings, Kiwanis meetings. We'd go to festivals and parades on the weekend. And just seeing people come up to him and thank him for something that he had done to make their life better, just kind of something that really appealed to me. So public service is just kind of got baked into me early. When I graduated law school, I thought I was going to be a real estate attorney, but I ended up pivoting at the last moment and becoming a prosecutor. And I was clerking for Judge Mark Westbrook in Lexington County. And I got to sit up there on the bench with the judge every day for that year, and I got to see people go into the courtrooms and plead their cases. And I just fell in love with the courtroom. I fell in love with the idea of being a part of the law enforcement community. So I pivoted from being a transactional lawyer to being a prosecutor, and the rest is history.
What prompted you to run for AG?
So a couple of years before I ran for Attorney General, I was prosecuting a case that involved a young woman who had been sexually assaulted by this guy. And during that time, she was like 12 to 15 years old, so it was early adolescence. That case got conflicted down to the Attorney General's office and assigned to me, and I took it to trial. It was an 8-day-long trial. It was a very graphic case. I'll spare you the details. At the end of that trial, he was convicted and sentenced to 18 years in prison. And I remember distinctly as we were walking out of the courtroom, he was being taken to the Department of Corrections. She and I were walking out the back of the courtroom, and I looked over, and she was very emotional. Her eyes were watery, and I remember thinking she was upset, and I asked her, "Are you okay?" And she's before I tell you what she said, the information I omitted, Gavin, was that the man that had done all these horrible things to her during that 4-year period was not only her grandfather, but was a retired police officer. And he would say things to her when she was 13 years old, like, "No one will believe you because I'm a cop, you're a kid." He would explain what reasonable doubt was. All I need is one juror to have reasonable doubts. He'll say you'll destroy the family.
Terrifying, yeah.
Yeah, he manipulated her, and she didn't know how to, overcome that. So as we're walking out, she looks up to me and she says, "Alan, I'm not crying because I'm sad. I'm crying because I'm happy. For the first time in my life, I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor." And I remember that was like a gut punch. I remember thinking, wow. And we could not undo what happened to her, but I could play a role in being a bridge from victimhood to survivorship for her. I could give a voice to someone who had no voice. I could empower someone who felt they had no power. And I don't know where she is today because I was like 18 years ago, but I know wherever she is, she's a survivor today, not a victim. When the opportunity to consider running for Attorney General opened up, I love the challenges of leadership that I'd learned in the military as a young officer, and I love my passion for prosecution. And when the opportunity to run to be the state's chief prosecutor as Attorney General opened up, I put the two together. It made sense to me. And I had never run for office before. I had no political background, but I made a decision there that I can live with losing. I can't live with not knowing. And I offered my name up that day or that year, and I worked my butt off. And the people of South Carolina gave me the great lifetime honor and privilege of serving as their Attorney General. Now I'm the longest serving Attorney General in the country.
When you look back over that tenure, I mean, what are the big accomplishments? What are the big proudest moments that you have looking back at your tenure as AG?
Well, first off, the office is over 300 years old. It predates the state. So when you think of an ancient office and how it's evolved over 3 centuries, you got to think, all right, what is my footprint going to look like in the history of this office? And so I tried to really push the office into the modern world. I tried to upgrade it on technology. I tried to change the culture of the office. We were able to create the State Human Trafficking Task Force, which did not exist. There were no human trafficking prosecutions because there was no human trafficking crime. So there were no stats being taken. We created that task force, grew it from about 15 members to over 1,500 members. We quadrupled the funding for the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force because we're still backlogged today.
Sure.
It is very difficult. These are very difficult cases to prosecute. But we quadrupled the funding for that, adding many prosecutors and forensic investigators. We reformed our victim services. We created the Crime Victim Services Division, and we consolidated from all state agencies, all victim services at the wholesale level at state government, so that all victims in the state of South Carolina and all victim services in the South Carolina come to the Attorney General's office for their training, for their funding. With the ombudsman's now located there. We have the compensation folks are here now. So we do all the training for the victims advocates. So I'm effectively now the chief victims advocate. I would say I'm the chief advocate for victims advocates in South Carolina. That was a major issue. And then, of course, Gavin, our efforts to push back when people would pass unconstitutional laws or conduct unconstitutional actions on the state of South Carolina. We pushed back during COVID. We pushed back during the Obama and Biden administrations when they were passing regulations that were hurting farmers, hurting small businesses. We were out there filing lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit. Many of these lawsuits we won. We didn't win them all, but we were able to raise the issue up in the public discourse and represent the people of South Carolina. Those are very proud accomplishments for me.
And when you join those lawsuits nationwide, I mean, what does that add? I mean, is it just to show that you have support with other states when you're trying to fight back against some of these federal regulations?
Well, it's funny, some of the criticisms I got from my detractors are Alan Wilson needs to focus on South Carolina, right? He doesn't need to be out there doing all these other lawsuits. Well, they don't understand these lawsuits all around the country do affect South Carolina, and not getting involved with them hurts our state. I'll give you an example. During the Biden administration, they passed a federal regulation through the Department of Education saying if you don't allow boys in the girls' bathrooms, you will lose your federal funding. At the same time, the state legislature passed a law saying if you do allow boys to go in the girls' bathroom, you lose your state funding. There was a lawsuit that was not even in our state. It was out in another circuit in Florida, the 11th Circuit, that was challenging that. I joined in that case. It went to the Supreme Court, found that the Biden administration regulation was overruled. Had we not been involved in that case, the schools in South Carolina would have been left with an untenable position of we either lose federal or state funding because we can't keep them both. But we went to another state, engaged in another case that helped us here. The Scarametti case 2 years ago, which was a case that dealt with can states pass a law prohibiting the transitioning of 12-year-old kids into the opposite sex. And the states said, yes, we should be able to do that. We got sued, just like Tennessee. Tennessee's law went up ahead of ours. So I joined in that one because I wanted to get an answer at the Supreme Court there on Tennessee so that we could resolve it here in South Carolina. So defending the rule of law all over the country was defending the rule of law here in South Carolina.
So, General Wilson, you told me what got you motivated to serve in the military, to run for AG. Tell me what got you to run for governor right now, to throw your hat in the ring in this race in 2026.
Well, a couple things. First off, as Attorney General, there is a lot of power to focus on a few things. And, as Attorney General, I've had the opportunity to weigh in on a lot of issues. One of those issues is going after corruption in government. Everyone focuses on elected officials, but there's a lot of rampant corruption on non-elected officials, people serving at all levels of government. I can't tell you the number of times we would investigate some allegation of corruption, and what we would find would be fraud, waste, and abuse, or abusive practices, wasteful practices, but they weren't criminal. They weren't violations of any criminal statute. It was bad government.
Yeah.
And what I've learned and what I've tried to explain to people is you can't always litigate your way out of bad government. You can't always indict your way out of bad government. Sometimes you have to be in a position to remove personnel and implement policies. As the Attorney General, I could indict and sue all day long, but I couldn't remove personnel and I couldn't implement policies. The governor can. So the governor has a different set of constitutional tools in their tool bag. And the ability, I'd have a broader portfolio to engage on economic issues affecting businesses. As Attorney General, I've been defending businesses for the last 15 years. I could implement policies and put in place personnel that would protect our citizens, which I've been doing in courts as Attorney General. So for me, it seemed like a natural transition to go to the CEO of South Carolina, because I have been the CEO of the Attorney General's office, which is in the last 15 years, we've recovered $2 billion for the state. And so I would like to be able to take that type of leadership with me to the governor's office.
General Wilson, you have actually been in life and death situations when you served abroad. Over your 30 years in military service, can you talk to us about that time serving in Iraq and what you did? I know there's a recent ad out talking about your time over there, and you have some of your journals from that time over there. But walk us through what that was like, because that was in the early 2000s, right after 9/11. It's a different world back then. It was a nerved world in some ways. What was it like serving over there and getting that call to have to go?
Well, thank you. I deployed in late 2003, early 2004, and in 2004 I was leading a convoy. I was a staff officer in the Field Artillery Brigade serving in Iraq doing convoy operations, and I was leading a convoy, and our convoy came under attack twice in a 24-hour period. One was a roadside bomb, an IED, and the other one was brief, intermittent small arms fire in Baghdad. But the convoy commercial you're talking about is something that really impresses me to this day, because I got to observe the heroism of some of the most amazing young men I've ever seen in my life. And in fact, I journaled about, I kept journal notes. These are my 3 journals from my Operation Iraqi Freedom Tour. 367 entries, and I have an entry for every day I was over there, and I wrote extensively about my experiences, and I wrote about this one. And to sum it up, our convoy came under a roadside bomb attack, which destroyed a vehicle immediately behind me. It damaged my vehicle, not rendering it inoperable, but still damaged it. Shrapnel missed me and the occupants of my vehicle by a foot or two. I went out the front windshield, so we were spared. The vehicle behind us was not as lucky. It caught on fire. And I watched 3 young soldiers come back into the kill zone, climb into a burning tractor trailer truck, and pull these soldiers out. And then we left and went back to a forward operating base where we took stock of everything. And I tell people all the time, to this day, when I think about having the courage to do something like run for governor or make a tough decision as Attorney General, I think of the courage of those soldiers. Some of those soldiers are in that commercial, but I think of the courage of those young men who through no personal regard for their safety, risked their lives to drive into an area they thought they would be shot, climb onto a vehicle they expected to explode, and they did it to save their fellow brothers in arms. That inspires me 22 years later. And I put that commercial out there to basically brag on them and to let people know that I have served in the most hostile of conditions. And so being in politics and have people say mean things and attack my record and attack me personally pales in comparison to people who are trying to kill me.
Now for an update from the State Election Commission and its newly confirmed director, Conway Belangia. Welcome to the show and congratulations on the new job.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to the new job, and doing things for the state instead of for one county.
Well, yes, we'll talk about your background in a moment, sir, but I just want to ask you just about this position that you're in right now, statewide, of course. You replaced interim director Jenny Wooten, who still serves as chief of staff at the SEC. She simply didn't have that required election experience under her belt to become director like you have, and was put in that temporary position after Director Howard Knapp was arrested and fired last October on charges of embezzlement and misconduct in office. That's a case that is still ongoing. I'll spare us all the details of that because we have so much time. But there's been a lot of drama at the SEC, no doubt. Easy to say that, especially as we are now sprinting toward the June 9th primaries. You came on the scene in the middle of candidate filing back in March, and you were just recently confirmed by the state Senate on April 21st. So tell us what your vision is for the agency and how you plan to stabilize it.
Okay. As you stated, we are in a sprint towards the June primaries, and that is the first order of business for me and the staff at the State Election Commission, is to make sure that that June primary is conducted at the highest efficiency that we can muster county to county.
And how's that going so far? What's the status?
It's going well. The drama that took place at the State Election Commission really had nothing to do with the elections, and none of that affected the elections. And so it's just a change in who's driving the car. Mm-hmm. But the vehicle, the State Election Commission, is operating very, very well. And so we are, in the situation of being able to conduct elections like we always have. Mm-hmm. And so I'm confident that our primary in June and runoff 2 weeks after that, and that going into November, that the elections will be no change for the voters. Mm-hmm. They'll do the same thing, act the same way, produce their ID, cast their ballot after they check it to make sure that who they want to vote for is on that ballot. Mm-hmm. and then we will certify all the results, and take care of anything past that. But that's the major function of our election process, is to make sure these are done properly and fairly.
And I'll talk more about your efforts at the agency and some more of your background in a moment, but we had some big news this week, specifically dealing with your commission. There has been a lot of friction between the states and the U.S. Department of Justice when last year they were seeking to obtain detailed voter information such as social security numbers, driver's license numbers, that's beyond what was publicly available, in an effort to check for ineligible or non-citizen voters, something that I've not been aware of any problems here in South Carolina. Your predecessors have never talked about that to any degree. But tell us about the agreement that was struck between the Commission, the state of South Carolina, and the Department of Justice this week.
The biggest thing is that we protected the Social Security number, which is the only thing that we collect that is protected, and it's protected by federal law as well as state law. And so as long as we could protect that, and then we didn't mind providing that information. But that took a long time. We had 2 federal shutdowns. We had change in staff at DOJ, and we've also had change of staff here in the state. And so, the timing just happened to hit whenever I started. Mm-hmm. But the negotiations between the state of South Carolina and the DOJ have been ongoing for a long time. Mm-hmm. And so whenever certain agreements could be put into place, that's when the state of South Carolina decided to sign the Memorandum of Understanding. And with that, we've protected the Social Security number by hashing, which is a new term for me, and also we retain the right to monitor and any information they send to us by way of there's somebody illegal, there's somebody who's ineligible, or they're registered in another state even. We have the right to review all of those before we remove them from any roles in South Carolina. And we'll follow our standard protocol with that. So it's a process, but we retain the right to make the final determination. That's not a DOJ function, mm-hmm. even though in other states it is. The agreement with other states was that, when we send you this information, you've got to remove these people. And we said, no, we're in the business of conducting elections, and we will protect our voters. And if we find a reason to remove them from the rolls, we'll do that. But you can just advise us, and we'll take it from there.
So what do you credit that to compared to other states? I mean, our ability to negotiate such an agreement where we do have such power?
I wouldn't necessarily call it power, but the back and forth. I think the DOJ and the state of South Carolina, they wanted to come to some arrangement because it's not a bad function that they're doing for the states, but it needs to be vetted a little bit better. Mm-hmm. And of course, the real challenge was, can we protect the South Carolina voter? And when we got to that point, and DOJ was willing to do that, then we signed the agreement. But it was a situation with DOJ of here it is, take it or leave it. And we said, well, we'll leave it. And then they say, well, can we reach some agreement? Mm-hmm. And then it was back and forth and back and forth. And so whenever, like in any negotiation, when things got together and both sides could agree, then we signed the agreement.
Mm-hmm. And what's the process already? I mean, have you all already gone through the voter rolls to make sure that there are no non-citizens or ineligible voters on the rolls? I mean, it seems like that's been the scrutiny that we've been going under for the past 10 plus years always when it comes to elections. Yeah,
actually, that goes back to the National Voter Registration Act of 92 or 94, anyway. Mm-hmm. But it's difficult for the state to monitor and look for illegals and that the people who should not be on our rolls. Now, it used to be, and the reason we collect Social Security numbers is for that main reason, and then all of a sudden we find out that, illegals were given Social Security numbers. Well, that complicates matters because we have to deal with the form that comes to us. Mm-hmm. And the federal government won't let us do a lot of checking of that information. So we try to monitor as best we can. Polling mm-hmm. places are small in relationship to the state, mm-hmm. but so when somebody goes to vote, hopefully they're looking at friends and neighbors that are conducting the election, and they can. Sort of know that this address here is a place where it's more transient than permanent, and they may question, but mm-hmm. by and large, we've trusted our system as best we can. I'm sure we have some on the rolls, but not in big numbers. Mm-hmm. So we've been pretty good in doing that at the county level and then at the state level.
And so, Conway, we have about 3 minutes left, and I want to ask you a bunch of other questions, but will you make those findings public from the DOJ? Anything that they find that you guys need to cross-reference with?
That will be legal issues that we will address, mm-hmm. and if we can, we will. The idea of transparency is strong. Mm-hmm.
Going more towards your background, you come from directing one of the largest county election offices in Greenville. Did you ever expect that you'd be running this show statewide? And do you have any plans to make any changes that you've maybe seen over your 4 decades in elections that you've been waiting to implement?
Well, I can truthfully say that many years ago, I probably had aspirations to be in this job. But in recent times, that aspiration sort of waned. Mm-hmm. But the opportunity presented itself in a situation where I thought I could be of good service to the state of South Carolina. And so I'm here. Mm-hmm. As far as changes go, the only thing that will change is the emphasis from the State Election Commission, because we will depend on and work with and assist counties statewide. We want the counties to be part of a team, and that was not prevalent with the previous administrator. So that attitude from the State Election Commission to the counties is going to be different, and we hope a better situation, because if we didn't have the counties and the poll workers, we couldn't conduct elections. So those two entities are real important to me and will be to me and my staff.
Have you fielded any concerns from election directors across the state about the DOJ MOU this week?
Of course.
Yeah.
Everybody has the, what are we doing or why are we doing this? And the real kicker here is that the only information that we have in our system that is not public information is the Social Security number. So we've been over backwards to make sure that that is protected, and we're sure that to the best of our ability, it is. And so we feel confident moving forward with this process. Hardly anybody's going to see anything from this. We will deal with the few names that they send to us, which we expect there will be a few names, but we will deal with those.
And of course, voter registration deadline is May 10th, and you can go to scvotes.org to find that information. Any final words with 20 seconds about just the faith that you have in elections over the past 40 years?
Well, we understand that elections are a ground-up situation. We need good poll workers, and poll workers are our friends and neighbors in our neighborhoods and in our communities that we hope will step up and conduct elections for us. The pay's not good, but a lot of people will do it because they want good, clean elections. And if they want good, clean elections, then come be a poll worker.
Gotcha.
And that'll filter up to us through the counties, and we'll have a wonderful election season, and hopefully keep that confidence that people have in South Carolina elections at the high level that it is.
And we'll catch up with you after the primaries and before the general election this year. That's State Election Commission Director Conway Belangia. Thanks so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
And that's it for us this week. For South Carolina ETV, I'm Gavin Jackson. Be well, South Carolina.